Imagine, it's 12th century England, where the king had all the power and the people had almost none. People are starving, sick, and even dying. Why is this? It's because of taxes. These unfair taxes were put into place by King John, often portrayed as a tyrant and awful king.
King John was such a terrible king and often seen as a tyrant in depictions such as Robin Hood because he needed to increase taxation a lot during this time. He was ruling for his brother in the end of the 12th century while his brother was off at the crusade, and he really needed to raise a lot of money. Both sent his brother on crusade, and then his brother actually got kidnapped, had to be ransomed. There's a whole story there. The point is, he needed money, and he's taking them from the nobility in the church. And neither the nobility nor the church, nor anyone presumably, likes to be taxed. So that was a big part of it. And also, he was infringing on a lot of feudal rights that had long been held as sacred.
No one liked King John, especially not the English aristocracy, who were getting taxed the most. So what did they do to end this suffering? They created Magna Carta, a peace treaty at the time, but it became so much more. In June of 1215, King John's barons forced him to sign Magna Carta at Runnymede, a small field in England. Magna Carta was the saving grace of England. It stated the rights of the barons, people, and more. Magna Carta broke through the king's rule by taking some of the king's power, giving that power to the barons, and establishing the law of the land clause.
First, Magna Carta broke through the king's rule by limiting the king's power, and specifically, the king's power to tax. The people were fed up with the king taking everything from them, their money, their food, and even their lives. One of the things that contributed to this was the unfair taxes. Although King John was trying to help his brother Richard by paying his ransom, the barons didn't see it that way, which is why the barons pressured King John to sign Magna Carta. Clauses 12 and 14 addressed the king's power to tax. In Clause 12 of the Magna Carta, it states, "No scutage nor aid shall be imposed on our kingdom, unless by common council of our kingdom." Scutage is a fancy word for taxes, and basically, this means that no taxes can be imposed without the permission of a council of barons and churchmen. Of course, the council would not give in to being taxed easily. When the king wanted to raise taxes, he had to consult none other than the barons.
That said, the second way Magna Carta broke through the king's rules by giving some of the king's power to the barons. Not only did Magna Carta give the barons a say when it came to taxation, Clause 61 of Magna Carta made the barons the 25 rulers of England. Of course, that clause was eventually removed because it was too controversial. Imagine the king not being king anymore. Magna Carta made the barons, who are much more like people than the king is, the partial rulers of England. One debate among historians is whether Magna Carta gave power to the barons or to the people.
The Magna Carta guaranteed rights to free men, which essentially meant men who owned property. So, in effect, it was aiming to just give rights to the barons. At this time, political thought had it that the so-called masses didn't deserve the same fundamental rights as the landed aristocracy. However, I think that the Magna Carta had wider implications that ended up giving rights to a more broad group of people, especially in later centuries.
Magna Carta made it so that the king could not do certain things without the permission of the barons. This broke through the king's rule because the barons were given some of the power of the king, which throughout history was a first. This broke a barrier because before the king had all the power, now some of this power was in the hands of his barons.
The last way Magna Carta broke through the king's rule is the law of the land clause. Originally, Magna Carta contained 63 clauses, but along the way, 60 of those clauses were removed from English law. This left 3 clauses to remain today, one of which was Clause 39, aka the law of the land clause. This clause states, "No free man is to be arrested or imprisoned, or disseized or outlawed or exiled, or in any other way ruined, nor will we go against him or sinned against him, except by the lawful judgment of his peers or by the law of the land." This made it so King John could not put you in jail with no context. Now there had to be a trial. This clause influenced state constitutions in America, and one example of this is in Article 1, Section 8 of the Tennessee Constitution. It states, that no man shall be taken or imprisoned, or disseized of his freehold, liberties, or privileges, or outlawed or exiled, or in any manner destroyed or deprived of his life, liberty, or property, but by the judgment of his peers, or the law of the land. And it also became the basis for the 5th and 14th Amendments to the United States Constitution, which state that no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Sadly, the law of the land clause only applied to free men, and most of the population was not free. But due process, which is based on the law of the land clause, applies to everyone.
Yes, due process protects virtually anyone. There's language in the 14th Amendment that says any person. So even aliens have due process rights under our Constitution. That being said, juvenile defendants don't have the full panoply of due process protections that adult criminal defendants do.
Clause 12 also contributed to the American Revolution against taxation without representation. So this ancient document from England, the country that was taxing America, inspired the American campaign that was significant to the Revolutionary War. The law of the land clause made it so King John could not imprison people without trial. This contributed to English history and English law, and American history in the Bill of Rights. This broke barriers in England and America. Hence, this is the reason Donald Trump can't say, "You're fired," and have someone burnt at the stake. That is how establishing the law of the land clause contributed to Magna Carta breaking barriers.
In conclusion, Magna Carta broke through the king's rule by limiting his power, giving some of the king's power to the barons, and gifting generations to come with the law of the land clause. For a short time after this, the people were happy. No more taxation, no more starvation, and lots more money. But sadly, not long after King John gave approval, Pope Innocent III declared it void and took it out of use. This sparked the First Barons' War. And during this war, King John died of dysentery, leaving his 9-year-old son, King Henry III, on the throne. Imagine that! A 9-year-old kid ruling a kingdom! Thankfully, until he was of age, he had a regent to rule for him. His regent later reinstated Magna Carta without Clause 61. After that, Magna Carta fell out of use. Then, in the 17th century, it returned to use in England and other places. So first it was the Good Charter, then it was a relatively okay charter, then it was the What Charter, then it became the Great Charter we know today. Now people in England can live happily with a monarch that has hardly any power. And this is in part because of Magna Carta. Magna Carta is one of the most important documents in history, and it even inspired the American Constitution.
I think probably the most important part is just the kind of general concept of having a charter between the governed and the governor. That idea was really important to the first colonists that came over from England to America, for the people who created each state constitution, and for the people who made the U.S. Constitution. So, I think it's not so much the specifics of Magna Carta, because a lot of it was kind of medieval law that was very specific to the time, but the basic principle that there needs to be an agreement that restricts the king or Congress and the president's ability to govern and impose consequences on the people that they govern.
As one of the barons wrote on his tomb, Magna Carta est lex, diende caveat rex, which translates to Magna Carta is the law, the king better beware.